"What about Ariana?" someone asked. Chaka Khan didn't even blink. "Okay." "Her? You like Ari? She's all right. Good on her." Her voice trailed off as she pretended to faint. "I'm fallen. Somebody catch me." Then she straightened, her eyes sharp, her tone turning to steel. "Plus, I don't want to sing with another woman. I ain't got nothing to say." "Okay, with a woman. You say it by yourself." It sounded like a joke, a diva moment, a meme for the internet. But underneath that tired humor was something else. A woman who had already survived too much, seen too much, lost too much. At 72 years old, Chaka Khan lives tucked away in a quiet pocket of Los Angeles, miles from the arenas she once set on fire, far from the roaring crowds that used to chant her name until their voices broke. The curtains in her house are almost always closed. Neighbors quietly say they rarely see her step outside at all. And for the first time in her life, the Queen of Funk has gone almost completely silent. How does a woman who once shook the world with her voice end up like this? Alone, sick, exhausted, surrounded by secrets she never wanted exposed. Behind the records and the glitter sits a file most people never open. A son once accused of murder, 4 decades of addiction battles, shattered friendships with other divas, betrayals buried inside the industry, family wounds that cut deeper than any applause could ever heal. Because Chaka Khan's tragedy isn't the story the public thinks it already knows. It's the story she spent a lifetime trying to bury until everything finally collapsed around her. Her downfall didn't start with drugs. It didn't start with fame. It didn't even start with men. It began the moment the world quietly decided that Chaka Khan didn't belong to herself. Everything that would one day nearly destroy her was already forming long before she walked onto a stage, long before she hit that first note that made a room fall silent, long before headlines started calling her a queen. The roots of her tragedy were planted in the streets of South Chicago, in neighborhoods carved up by violence, fear, and survival, places where childhood ended early and trust could get you hurt. She was born in 1,953 inches, a cramped apartment on the south side, where winter winds slipped through cracked windows and sirens sliced through the dark like warning alarms. Poverty wasn't just a situation, it was the atmosphere. Mothers hurried children inside before gangs claimed the sidewalks. Police cruisers looped the blocks like restless sharks. Abandoned buildings sometimes lit up in flames at night, orange against the black sky. Every corner carried a lesson: protect yourself, or you won't last. By 1965, Chaka was only 11 years old when she joined her first street gang. Not because she craved chaos, but because, in South Chicago, being unaligned was its own death wish. She walked to school with her fists clenched and shoulders squared, copying the older girls who had managed to survive long enough to teach her how. She became tough because the environment demanded it. And under that armor, there was still just a scared young girl, already learning how to hide terror behind a stare that dared anyone to challenge her. Music became the only door that opened out. Her voice was too fierce for her age, too raw, too honest to be ignored. But talent, especially in a world that preys on the young, can be both a gift and a trap. And for Chaka, it became both at once. In 1969, at just 16, she joined the Afro Arts Theater, a collective built around African culture, revolution, and music. For the first time, she tasted a kind of freedom: drums, poetry, radical thought, and songs that made her feel like she belonged to something bigger than the streets. But it was also the first time she started walking into rooms full of adults who noticed her for reasons that had nothing to do with just her voice. She found herself surrounded by musicians twice her age, activists with complicated personal lives, men with magnetic power and their own secrets. In that world, lines blurred easily. The applause in those small theaters was intoxicating. The attention wrapped around her like stage lights. And the danger, at first invisible, was quietly moving closer with every show, every rehearsal, every late-night conversation. Within a year, she joined Rufus, the band that would change everything and set her on a path she could never fully step off again. Joining Rufus was like stepping straight into a storm. One moment, she was a Chicago teenager, The next, she was traveling from city to city, performing in smoky clubs, cutting demos in cramped studios, and being thrown into the orbit of older men, record executives, aggressive managers, and powerful figures who knew exactly what a rising star was worth. The industry began circling her like wolves. By 1973, Rufus had exploded across the country. Their records took over radio stations, shows sold out. And at the center of all that electricity was Chaka's voice, ferocious, soulful, impossible to ignore. She was only 20 years old, barely old enough to rent a car. But to the people around her, she wasn't a young woman. She was an asset, a product. Insiders would later summarize it coldly. She was a 20-year-old girl with $1 million voice, and everyone wanted a piece of her. Producers wanted control. Managers wanted access. Older men wanted intimacy. Labels wanted ownership. And almost no one in those rooms full of contracts and cocaine seemed to see an actual human being standing in front of them. She was young. She was brilliant. She was surrounded. And under the weight of it all, she was already starting to crack. The collapse didn't begin with a headline. It began quietly. Cocaine crept into her world in 1974, introduced casually at after-parties, studio sessions, and dressing rooms. It was the drug of that decade. Executives used it, musicians used it, assistants used it. It kept the nights going, kept the exhaustion numb, kept the touring machine moving. For Chaka, cocaine made the endless schedules feel survivable. It took the edge off fear, off pressure, off loneliness. But the moment it entered her bloodstream, the industry's hold on her tightened. Then heroin arrived, not presented as temptation, but as an escape. Some people later said it came through a boyfriend. Others believed it was passed from someone within the band. And there were darker whispers, unproven but persistent, that someone wanted Chaka dependent. Because a dependent artist is easier to control, easier to manipulate, easier to drain financially. Whatever the real origin, heroin wrapped around her fast. One of the stories most fans never heard traces back to a backstage corridor in San Francisco, late 1976. During a major show, Chaka reportedly collapsed just behind the curtain. Her body went limp, her breathing turned shallow, her pulse grew erratic. Crew members panicked. A manager rushed to have any drugs hidden immediately. A promoter insisted she be revived at any cost. Refunds were unthinkable. When she finally came back around, still shaking, barely able to stand on her own, they pushed her out onto the stage anyway. The audience roared her name, never knowing she had nearly died minutes before stepping into the spotlight. That collapse wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a pattern. Between 1975 and 1977, Chaka's life fell into a terrifying cycle. Record, tour, crash, revive, repeat. She covered bruises with makeup. She hid shaking hands behind dramatic gestures. She buried panic attacks under oversized sunglasses and stage swagger. On stage, she was a goddess untouchable, blazing, larger than life. Off stage, she was coming apart. And many of the people around her, older, more experienced, more powerful, watched her struggle without truly stepping in. Because a broken artist is often easier to own than a free one, by 1977, whispers began drifting up and down the coasts, from LA to New York. Chaka's being controlled. Somebody's got her wrapped around the drugs. She's not even spending her own money. She doesn't know who's really handling her contracts. Whether those claims were fully true or only partially, the impact was the same. People believed she was trapped. And Chaka, young and spiraling, felt it herself. She felt the walls closing in. She felt the eyes watching her every move. She felt the weight of fame pressing down on her chest like a permanent hand. By 1978, the girl from Chicago, the one who learned to dodge gangs, navigate poverty, and survive chaos, was now facing something she couldn't punch, couldn't see clearly, couldn't run from. Fame had rescued her from the streets, and fame had cursed her with a new kind of prison. This was only the first chapter in the tragedy of Chaka Khan. The music had made her immortal, but the cost of that immortality was just beginning to surface. If you know someone whose life or personality mirrors this story, share their name in the comments. We'd like to explore their journey as well. The stage made her untouchable. The drugs made her disappear. The tragedy of Chaka Khan did not reach its darkest point when she overdosed, or when she collapsed behind a curtain. It did not peak when she lost control of her voice, her body, or even her bank accounts. It peaked the moment her addiction slipped past the velvet ropes and studio doors, walked into her home, wrapped itself around her children, and began tearing apart the only thing she loved more than music, her family. Because the truth is this: Chaka Khan's most brutal battles were never the ones fought under stage lights. They were fought on kitchen floors, behind locked bedroom doors, inside rehab centers, and in the terrified, uncomprehending eyes of her own children. The descent began in 1979, right when her career looked unstoppable. She was touring constantly, collecting awards, selling out arenas, appearing on magazine covers. To the outside world, Chaka glowed confident, electric, invincible. But behind the polished interviews and explosive performances was a woman drowning in demands. Cocaine had become routine. Alcohol was a steady companion. And heroin, quiet, seductive, deadly, turned into the chain she could not break. There were nights when she walked on stage with her pupils blown wide, her lips trembling from withdrawal, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the microphone with both fists. She covered it with charisma, with jokes, with that legendary roar in her voice. The audience had no idea she was sometimes high enough to nearly forget her own name. By 1981, addiction had woven itself into every corner of her life. Days blurred. She slept until afternoon, then lurched awake as the sun went down, consumed by the need to use. Some nights she didn't sleep at all. The rituals of addiction, hiding, lying, bargaining, promising, breaking promises, became so normal she couldn't see how violently they were reshaping the lives around her. Her daughter, still a small child, learned early how to sidestep rolled-up bills and syringes on the bathroom tile. She learned to read her mother's mood from the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the fast, uneven steps of panic, the slow, dragging rhythm of a crash. Then came 1983, the year the illusion shattered. Chaka was living in Los Angeles, in a house where the curtains stayed shut and the air was thick with stale smoke and unspoken fear. According to reports, child services intervened after a neighbor heard incoherent shouting, followed by days of eerie silence coming from inside the home. The official file reportedly mentioned suspected substance abuse, an unsafe environment, and emotional instability. Chaka temporarily lost custody of her young daughter, an event so traumatic it became a permanent fracture in the family's timeline. Fans were told it was just a misunderstanding. It wasn't. It was the first undeniable sign that the addiction had crossed a line there was no easy way back from. The mid-1980 seconds turned into a blur: tour buses, dim hotel rooms, blackouts, sudden disappearances. Chaka chased highs the way she once chased melodies, obsessively, relentlessly, convinced that one more hit could finally silence the chaos tearing at her mind. She would vanish for days and then reappear as if nothing had happened, brushing off concern with a laugh or a half-hearted excuse. But everything was happening. Her money slipped through her fingers. Her health cracked. Close friendships eroded. And inside the home, her children watched their mother morph into someone they barely recognized, someone they loved but couldn't trust to stay present. The breaking point came in 1988, in the kitchen of her Los Angeles house. Her teenage son, Damian Holland, walked in early one morning and found her on the floor unconscious, white foam at the corners of her mouth, her skin shockingly cold. He screamed for help. A relative tried to revive her. Someone dialed 911 with shaking hands. The paramedics, according to those who were there, knew what they were dealing with the moment they saw her pupils. For Damian, that morning seared itself into his memory like a brand. For Chaka, it was proof of something even darker. She was no longer only destroying herself, she was destroying the people who depended on her. The incident never became a headline. No splashy scandal, no magazine cover, no television interviews. The industry moved quickly and quietly. She was valuable. She was a name, and names like hers were protected, not exposed. The public never heard about the morning Chaka Khan nearly died on the kitchen floor in front of her child. Between 1990 and 1994, the fight became impossible to hide from those inside her orbit. Chaka reportedly entered rehab 7 times in just 4 years. Malibu, Santa Monica, Arizona, New York. Some stays lasted weeks, others lasted only a few days before she disappeared again. One doctor later claimed that Chaka came within inches of death more than once. Her body was pushed past its limits by years of heavy use. Her immune system faltered. Her memory slipped. Her weight swung dangerously up and down. She had moments of piercing clarity, followed by collapses so sudden she would wake up not knowing what city she was in. Through these years, the industry kept most of the details out of the spotlight. Stories circulated behind the scenes, whispered in dressing rooms and management offices. A former tour manager privately claimed that in New York in 1992, Chaka passed out seconds before she was due to walk on stage. According to that account, the team dragged her into a nearby hotel room, flushed drugs down the toilet, wiped her face, changed her clothes, and scrambled to invent a cover story. They told the promoter she had a throat infection, but backstage staff were convinced. They knew the truth. Chaka had been too high to stand. Some insiders said that was the night she should have died, and the rumor that followed was cruel. Someone in the camp supposedly cleaned up the scene faster than paramedics could arrive because canceling the show would have cost too much money. Publicly, her career kept going, albums released, award shows attended, guest appearances booked. Privately, her life unraveled like thread pulled from a seam that never should have been touched. Relationships collapsed. Trust dissolved. Family gatherings often decayed into shouting and tears. Even the music that once saved her began to slip away. Some studio sessions ended with Chaka storming out in frustration, unable to sing through the tremors of withdrawal. During this period, she started repeating a phrase that family members would never forget. "My life is cursed." She believed it, fully. She believed that something, trauma, fate, a shadow, was following her, stalking her through every era of her life. Therapy didn't silence it. Music no longer drowned it out. Drugs couldn't erase it. And each time she looked at her children, the people she loved most, she saw not their faces, but the damage, the missed moments, the fear, the instability she had allowed into their lives. That guilt became another addiction, another weight, another way to run from herself. By 1996, Chaka Khan stood at a crossroads most people never live long enough to see. Either die young like so many artists before her, or turn and face the demons she had been sprinting from since the 1,970 seconds. She chose to survive. But survival came at a cost. Because what happened to her family during those years, the scenes they witnessed, the secrets they held, the scars they carried, left wounds no comeback, no award, no sold-out show could ever fully heal. The tragedy of Chaka Khan isn't just what drugs did to her. It's what they did to everyone who loved her. If you know someone whose life or personality mirrors this story, share their name in the comments. We'd like to explore their journey as well. Some tragedies end a tour, some end a career. This one shattered Chaka Khan's soul. It unfolded in a way no mother is ever built to handle, sudden, brutal, merciless. One moment, Chaka was fighting her own addiction, clawing her way back from the edge. The next, she was pulled into a nightmare so violent it ripped open every wound she had ever tried to bury. Because no overdose, no failed rehab, no broken relationship came close to the pain of what happened in September 2004, when her son became the center of a case that would hang over her family for years. It was Los Angeles. Late summer, the air thick, hot, heavy. Sirens in the distance, the kind of day when tragedy feels slower and meaner, like time itself refuses to move on. 17-year-old Christopher Bailey, who was connected to Chaka's family through her son Damian Holland, was found shot inside an apartment linked to them. The official police report was cold and clinical, stripped of emotion. But the scene itself was chaos. A mother screaming, neighbors crowding their balconies, officers moving through narrow hallways, flashes from crime scene cameras bouncing harshly off white walls. Within hours, the news rippled through the industry fast, sharp, unforgiving. Chaka Khan's son was being charged with murder. For the first time in decades, Chaka wasn't the headline, as a singer, as an icon, as a legend. She was a mother begging anyone who would listen to believe that her child was not a killer. She had survived overdoses. She had survived scandals. She had survived betrayals and the wreckage of her own addiction. But nothing had prepared her for the cold reality of staring at her son through the glass of a holding room, knowing his future now depended on evidence, lawyers, and a system she could not control. She did the only thing she knew how to do. She sacrificed everything. She mortgaged her house. She drained bank accounts. She sold jewelry, artwork, personal items she had once promised herself she would never let go of. Friends later said it looked like she was throwing her whole life into the fire just to save what was left of her family, emptying everything the way someone throws water onto a burning home, frantic, desperate, praying it might be enough. She hired top Los Angeles defense attorneys, private investigators, expert witnesses. Every dollar she had earned from decades on the road seemed to evaporate overnight. But money could not erase what the forensic reports suggested. When the first details came back, the case became even more unsettling. The autopsy showed a gunshot trajectory that didn't perfectly match the original story. The weapon reportedly carried no usable fingerprints from Damien, none on the grip, none on the barrel, none on the trigger. Neighbors said they heard arguing, but could not clearly identify the voices. Timelines had gaps. There were seconds no one could account for, actions no one wanted to explain. Police documents, according to later accounts, contained contradictions and unexplained silences. Some officers reportedly believed the shooting might have been accidental. Others suspected panic and terrible decisions made in a split second. The district attorney saw enough confusion and enough suspicion to move forward with charges. For Chaka, the uncertainty was its own form of torture. Every night, she lay awake, replaying the fragments she knew and the ones she feared. Imagining the terror inside that apartment, imagining her son standing over a dying teenager, imagining a moment where a single mistake turned a teenage argument into a death that would haunt them all forever. She blamed herself not for the gun, not for the trigger, but for everything that came before, for the chaos, for the instability, for the years when addiction ruled the house. She knew better than anyone how trauma leaves residue, how it moves through families long before anyone notices the wave crashing. The case dragged into 2005, then into 2006. It stretched on like a wound that refused to heal. Chaka sat through hearing after hearing, her hands shaking, her sunglasses hiding the exhaustion carved deep into her face. Reporters saw a celebrity in a courtroom. She felt like a ghost attending her own slow-motion funeral. Family members would later describe that period as a never-ending burial. Hope rose and then collapsed every time new evidence surfaced or a new ruling came down. Then, after years of fear, headlines, and legal warfare, the verdict finally came. Damien was acquitted, not guilty. The court decided there was not enough solid evidence to convict. Chaka collapsed into tears outside the courthouse. Cameras caught it. Headlines focused on her relief, on the image of a mother embracing her son. But victory was not the end. It was just another twist. Because the legal system had one more blow to deliver. The victim's family filed a civil lawsuit. And civil court does not require proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It lives in the world of probability, responsibility, and balance of evidence. In late 2006, a civil jury found Damien liable for wrongful death. The judgment came to more than $1.3 million, money Chaka did not have. Money she would never truly be able to pay in full. Money that turned the acquittal into something hollow, almost meaningless. This was the moment Chaka's body began to crack under the weight. Stress ate at her. Guilt swallowed her. Fear soaked into everything. She started leaning on prescription painkillers not for a high, but to numb the relentless pressure, the headlines, the photographs she could not unsee, the questions she could not stop asking herself. What began as medication for anxiety and insomnia slowly shifted into another addiction layered on top of the old ones. By 2011, her dependence on painkillers had reportedly become so severe that there were days she moved through her own home in a fog, disoriented, like someone standing inside a life she no longer recognized. Doctors warned her again and again. Her heart was at risk, her liver was at risk, her brain